Yeah, I'll be back in a minute. I'm just going to take a 2-minute. Right. Yeah. We're going to start at 5. I'm going to close the door above you, okay?
I was just looking at the reference. I actually wrote about that incident in my book when the Buddha tried to stop the war between the people, his people, and
Oh wow, I didn't know about this until you just said it. That's great.
Yeah, he stood at the gate 3 times and tried to. It was a story that went back into basically. Where is it? Yeah. I guess we're going to be going live in a couple of minutes.
Yes. Charles will give us the signal. Charles, can you hear us? I can't see you now. He was on for everything's going
I can hear you.
Oh, good. Hey, I don't think I have to tell you this, but I've forgotten. You're going to record this, of course. Of course, it's streaming, so it doesn't really matter. But do you have to press a record button?
No.
Okay.
It's going to record to the cloud automatically.
Okay, beautiful. So here, this is Thanissara. For Thanissara, this is Charles.
Hi.
Hi, Charles. Nice to
Hello.
see you. Thanks for all your backup.
Thank you. Gonna get back. I gotta just check a couple things before we go. So
yeah, go do it, man. Bodega Bay is not far from you. It's a neighbor.
Yeah, no, lovely down there. Bit windy sometimes, right?
a little bit. We're nestled into a nice little spot actually, so we're spoiled a little bit.
Charles found out about us. He was at Spirit Rock hanging out once, and the bulletin board and where the old meditation hall was.
Yes, yes.
One of these DVA brochures.
Yeah.
And there he saw it, and then he was a volunteer. We called him our website. What do we call you? Website? I won't ask you anything. He was our website guy. He's a volunteer for like 7 years. And
Well,
then we figured we need a tech guy. It's not my thing. Plus, I need a lot of help. And so we interviewed a bunch of people, and guess what? Who we went to? He's been with us actually since 13, I think, before maybe 14, 2014. It's
yeah,
great,
brilliant. Brilliant. Well, great service.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, I'm going to start setting everything up to go live.
Okay. And I'm going to look at the chat question, Charles. You also?
Yes.
Okay. All right. If you see something really good, just jump. Of course, if you see something, but I'll be responsible for that because you'll be talking.
Sure. So
All right, I'm going to start the webinar.
Okay.
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 Hello, and welcome to the third episode of the DVA Speaker Series. Today we're joined by our very special guest, Thanissara, who will be talking with Bob Isaacson. And I'd like to turn it over right now to Bob.
Yeah, thanks, Charles. It's a great pleasure to have Thanissara with us today. What I wanted to do before I introduce her is just to give you a few updates on DVA, what we've done actually in the last 2 weeks since our last episode number 2 of our Speaker Series. What we're doing in the U.S. is we're increasing our engagement with U.S. centers. And so we're trying to move U.S. centers, as most of you know, towards compassionate diets. That's what we're trying to do. And we're doing a good job. We're moving slowly but surely. We're moving different centers in the direction to not support animal suffering. Also, we're reorganizing our U.S. chapter. This is a big thing. We'll have an announcement this week. It's exciting. I think this will be a real improvement on our organization. In Germany, our chapter in Germany is really taking off thanks to Marco and Alex out there. Lots going on. They have their own website that's being developed right now. Lots of people. They've also added a lot of DVA members. So there's a real buzz around our chapter in Germany, thanks to Marco and to Alex. And then this week, we hired a media consultant in Sri Lanka because what we're doing, we're all in on trying to pass an animal welfare bill to be the first one in that country, the Buddhist country, since 1907. So it used to be that if you torture an animal, you're fined, I think it's 20 rupees, which is just a few pennies right now. So there's now this bill, if we can get this passed, will be a huge difference, will make a huge difference to animals. And then finally, in Vietnam, I'll be announcing this week that we're hiring a person who's going to organize and direct our operations there. We've had our project in Vietnam going for about 2 years now. And so now we're going to have some extra leadership there. This is very exciting. It's a country of tens of millions of Buddhists, Vietnam is. So anyways, I'd like now to introduce Thanissara, and hope that those of you that have joined have had a chance to look at her bio. It's really quite amazing. Thanissara was a nun in the Ajahn Chah tradition for 12 years. She helped she was a founding member of both the Chithurst, I hope I pronounced that right, and Amaravati monasteries in England. And I know Amaravati, both I think are Ajahn Chah tradition monasteries there. She also has a master's in mindfulness-based psychotherapy from Middlesex University in the UK. And she and her husband, Kittisaro, received an invitation to teach in South Africa. Back in 1995, they actually became legal residents and lived in the country, I think, for 25 years. And you'll hear about that also. Did some amazing work there. So without any further ado, I'd like to introduce Thanissara. And why don't we start out with a question? I think that would probably be the best thing. So I mentioned Ajahn Chah tradition. So at Spirit Rock, where I practice, Ajahn Chah tradition has a big effect. practiced with some of the Thai monks. Could you tell us about your time as a monastic?
Hi, Bob. Thank you so much for inviting me into this space, and greetings, everyone. I'm so honored to join you all, particularly with our focus on liberating animals from the violence that they undergo due to our lack of awareness, really, and putting that awareness into action. So yes, the monastic life, well, I disrobed in 1991. So I was a monastic when I was young, and it was very formative it was very, formative of my life. There's so much from that training that lives in me and continues to inform Thanissara, my partner and husband, our work together and how we teach. And our inspiration was Ajahn Chah. I met Ajahn Chah when he first came to England in 1977. I was at a meditation retreat in a big center outside of Oxford. And there were a lot of us young people doing the meditating in the Burmese system. It was a big center that was owned by a Burmese couple that had escaped from the political upheavals in the 1960s from Myanmar or Burma. So Ajahn Chah arrived one day into this hall where we were all meditating after completing a 10-day retreat, which was the form that came through from the Burmese U Ba Khin teacher, the lay teacher U Ba Khin, and then Mahasi Sayadaw and Lady Sayadaw, Tongpulu Sayadaw. These were the great masters that brought these sort of translated a lot of the practice into forms that became a big bedrock of the transmission of the Dharma into the West. So anyway, Ajahn Chah arrived into this hall, and with Ajahn Sumedho, his senior first Western disciple. And they looked so incongruous together because Ajahn Sumedho was very tall and Ajahn Chah was very short and more squat, and Ajahn Sumedho was very tall and very thin at that time. So they arrived, and to me, they looked like they'd come from Mars. I'd never seen, it wasn't just how they looked, but the vibration was so compelling. And I think right from that first moment, I was drawn to them. And Ajahn Chah, one of the first things he did is he saw this Buddha. We didn't really even know it was a Buddha. We just thought it was this Chinese artifact or something we'd put in the corner. And he kind of picked up this Buddha and put it central, dusted it off, and he bowed to it. And I'd never seen, that bow for me really spoke to the perfect response in life, making this gesture of bowing. So anyway, to cut a very rambling story short, I did go out to Thailand to track him down at Wat Pong, Wat Nanachat, and had an audience with him, and he suggested I go be a nun. So I went to Wat Nanachat, the Western monastery, and stayed for a very short time. And then I thought I'd better go back to England to let my family know. I was 22 at the time. And then they just started the first monastery in England at that time, very near to my family home. So then I went, and then I stayed for 12 years. It's a very profound training, particularly in that era when it was very much modeled on what was happening in Thailand. It was quite rigorous. We'd start every day at 4 a.m. We had a lot of work to do because we were literally building the monastery. And then it would go, through till the evening pujas and meditations. And then once a week, we had the all-night meditation on the moon days. So that was it was a very sort of rigorous schedule. And the Vinaya discipline was rigorous as well. But I'm very grateful for that training. It stood me in good stead, really, for all the things that came after.
And I know that you spent, 25 years in South Africa? You were invited to take residency and all. Could you tell us about it? I'm sure our listeners would be interested in hearing about that, South Africa.
Well, when when I left the monastery, and then a short while afterwards, Thanissara left. He went to go back to Thailand to pay respects to Ajahn Chah. At that time, Ajahn Chah had been ill for 10 years and had been paralyzed, and really was a difficult situation. But he went back to pay respects and to communicate, although Ajahn Chah couldn't really speak at that time, but to sit with him. And he felt a blessing from Ajahn Chah, and he also left, and we then got together. And then it was hard to know what to do. That was in 1991. So we weren't really setting out to teach Dharma or to, we took some time. We went back to Ireland, which is where my family came from, my father and his family. And we spent some time there. And then we started to get invitations to teach retreats. So that's basically, from then until now, we've pretty much responded to most of the invitations that we've received to teach the Dharma. And one of those invitations was in 1994, just after the first free elections in South Africa. And so we went on it just for a few months, thinking we would just do a teaching engagement there. They had a sort of an emergent Buddhist center, the Buddhist Retreat Center in Akopo, which is a small rural village outside of Durban. But before long, Thanissara had an old friend. They'd been at Oxford University together, who was part of the Anglo-American mining company in South Africa. And when he heard that when we were teaching through that period, when we were there initially, we were invited to stay by the people that ran the center that we were at, and we decided that we would stay and help. So at that time, Thanissara's friend wanted to help us find a place to live. And that landed up becoming a piece of land in the high mountains, which were near to the center in the southern Drakensberg, which he put down initially an interest-free loan and put that in our name. And that all happened in a few weeks, which was rather, for us, having come from a monastic life where you actually have nothing, you own nothing, to suddenly having ownership of land, and particularly in such a fraught country at such a fraught time. It was quite challenging, actually. But we stayed and we built that place up, and it became a hermitage and then a center, which is still alive today, so Dhammagiri. And we continued for 7 years. We were guiding teachers of the original center that invited us, and tried to help them by, teaching Dharma, doing retreats, bringing in resources. And then also around that time, in the early 1990s, we became one of the focal points of the AIDS pandemic, which was spreading through a lot of African countries. And it, really was very impactful in South Africa. And so we started to shift from just purely the inner work of meditation to set up a project, to co-found a project to help respond to the enormity of what was happening in our local area, where there was a lot of misinformation and a lot of, the Black communities had been extremely under-resourced as the impact of apartheid. A lot of them had been relocated from their original lands. A lot of them were still in the migrant labor system, which also helped the spread of the virus. And there was just, there was a lot of illiteracy. There was just literally, it was a very confusing and difficult time for a community that wasn't really, it had the resources to meet such a huge threat to them. So, we got involved in rather than trying to help people personally, because people always were coming to our door. Could we help with a funeral? Could we help take someone to hospital? We decided that the most optimum thing would be to actually create projects. So we worked in tandem with San Francisco Insight Community, who for at least 10 years, helped to fundraise and co-worked with us to help support the emergence and grounding of several AIDS response projects. And then they became larger community development projects because, they're training up people, community health workers, literacy classes, health classes. It just became a much larger scope. And then we became involved very early on with a wonderful woman, Sister Abigail Ntleko, who had a home for vulnerable children. Many of them were orphans from the AIDS pandemic. So we're still involved with Sister Abby, and she's a nursing sister and a heroic figure. And she actually was awarded the Unsung Heroes Award in, I think it was about 2015 or so. And she was flown to San Francisco to receive that from His Holiness the Dalai Lama. And from that, a book was written about her life called Empty Hands. So that was one part of our work, but our main work was really still teaching Dharma, practicing Dharma, setting up month retreats, 3-month retreats, so people could do very deep Dharma practice there. And then also beginning to synthesize, not only from the Theravada stream of the lineage, but also from the Chinese lineage through the teachings of Master Hsien Hua, who we'd come into contact with very early on in our monastic life. When we were monastics, there was a lot of cross-pollination between our tradition and our monks and nuns, and the monks and nuns and the Chinese lineage of Master Hsien Hua, who has a center, many centers here actually in the US. He initially came again to San Francisco. That's where he set up shop first of all. And now has the large city of 10,000 Buddhas, which is just north of us in Ukiah, where we are now, which has been there for about 50 or 60 years. So we started in South Africa, we started to bring these two streams together, and particularly bringing forward the Kuan Yin Dharmas, the Shurangama teaching, the Chan, which is also a Kuan Yin Dharma taught by Avalokiteshvara from the Chinese lineages, and kind of marry them together with the depth teachings and practices that we had been schooled in through the Ajahn Chah Thai Forest School, which was also a profound meditative school, really. It had it followed the Vinaya, but its heart was a renunciant meditative practice. So they were natural allies. These two schools, which were transmitted through monasticism, were very have a lot of common ground, as do all the Buddhist schools, of course. But being in South Africa, I think being off the map of the what was happening in the transmission here in America and the insight communities and so on, it gave us the freedom to bring these together. And now we're in America, we're actually teaching these and doing trainings in these sort of the essential streams. Obviously, we can't do justice at all to the enormity of the transmission from Master Hsien Hua and the Theravada, but to try and bring some of the main core principles and practices together in the way that they complement each other.
Yes, it's very interesting. What an amazing experience that must have been for you. So Thanissara, you're a vegan. So what is it in all of the years that you've been practicing the Dhamma, which is another word for Dharma, right? Dhamma is Pali, Dharma is Sanskrit. So we're talking about the same thing. We say Dharma or Dhamma. What is it in your Dharma training? What is it in the teachings of the Buddha that has informed your decision to become a vegan?
Well, for me, it started with being a vegetarian, which is the first step, I think, for many people. And that started when I was 14 and I was in a library and I read a book about yoga that had a thing it was from India. And it had a piece about vegetarianism, and it hadn't struck me at all I know this sounds really naive, but this was, you have to, this was in the very early 1960s and no one was a vegetarian, no one, but it hadn't struck me that what meat was. I know that sounds absurd, but when I understood what it was and also what the book was recommended, I went home to my mom and said, I'm a vegetarian. And she was like, what's that? And actually, I didn't really, I sort of lived on cheese sandwiches for a year pretty much. And until I met some friends who actually knew how to cook properly. But then so I'd always been a vegetarian. And then the journey, moving into veganism, I think in terms of the Buddha's teaching, clearly the first precept of living, it's panadipata rapmani sikapadan samadhyami, those breathing things, breathing beings, all breathing beings, pana, prana, all breathing beings. As the training is, sikapadan, the training is not to harm, to not violate, So for me, that's a clear, vast roadway. The message is very clear that if you're in a situation where you can relinquish and diminish harm on any living being, in our monastic training, we wouldn't even squat a mosquito, but I think also we have to understand that the Dharma is not just what's written in the text. As Ajahn Chah would say, it's the living Dharma. It's what's unfolding in your own consciousness, the hiri ottappa, the awareness that comes as you awaken more, and to sort of relate your actions in your life to their consequences, and that is an immediately felt thing. We can talk about karma in very philosophical ways, but karma, vipaka, which means the results of your karma, occur more and more immediately when you're in the awakening practice journey. So you feel the consequence more immediately of everything we're doing and saying. So it becomes very hard to have blinkers on and to realize that if I'm sitting there in front of a plate of meat, that I'm not actually aware of the consequence. Or, and for me, the journey into veganism was slower. I awoke to it later than many vegans. And then it was difficult traveling. I had these excuses and, traveling in South Africa, no one was vegan at the time. And I also, I like to have milk in my English cup of tea, and I like cheese. And I would sort of struggle around that, and then I go to organic. And then one day it was so clear that feeling, that hiri ottappa inside, that it was such a deep feeling of an understanding that I am sort of answerable to these beings. I'm directly answerable to these beings whose products I'm using and who are undergoing massive violence due to my actions. And, I have to give a lot of kudos to the enormous work that the undercover agents have done in factory farming and really brought to us what exactly is happening. And I think also I was in that myth of not understanding the levels and the depths of harm, the spell that we're under in this society that completely disconnects us from the actual realities of what happens to cows, what happens to their life cycles, the interruption in their life cycles, the taking away of their calves and all of it, So it was so burning in my heart that, for the very next day, both Thanissara and I became, I gave up my teas. I gave it all. It was just like we became vegan. And it's been one of the best decisions we've made. And it is easier. I understand it's easier here. I live in the Bay Area now, where there's a lot of very cool options for vegans. But, we also then asked us, we had hired vegan cooks at our center in South Africa, which was also unusual to do because the centers was vegetarian, but they went full vegan and they did a beautiful job. And people started to love it. And then people would say, And I know in the African culture, meat is a very big thing, because it's like from my Irish side, it connects with a sense of your culture, that you have the money to buy meat, that it's something that you share, it's part of the ceremonial processes. So it was lovely when some of our African practitioners started to say they felt so good on a vegan diet. They felt great. And of course, there's all the issues to do with it being that one of the leading causes of climate disruption and breakdown, and global warming, and the devastation of the Amazon and the rainforests, and the water pollution, and the ocean dead zones, all of these, and this mass species extinction. And, and of course, the core of the horrors of what the animals go through. All of this is, important for us to connect those dots and to understand that, we're participating through partaking of animal products in this massive violence and this continuation of as humans as dominators of nature, rather than co-participants with nature, in relationship with nature. So all of those things, but for me, the core issue was to stop my participation completely with being implied in the violence towards animals, in particular those in factory farms and in that whole industry.
Yeah. Wow, that's so beautifully summarized, so many different things. So it sounds to me, just in listening to you, that it's not one part. Of course, the first precept, Panatipatau, or Amini Sikapadam Samadhi Ami, for sure, but also compassion, wise action. I mean, it's the sum, it's the totality of the teachings of the Buddha that led you in that direction.
Yes, I think it's easy. I know that, I mean, I came from a very strict Vinaya training, and I know, and I trained, in that day, we didn't have elder nuns, so the training was with the monks. And I know the depth of how that's held, and the minutiae that the mind goes into around, is this possible? Is that possible? What was meant? Gets very pedantic almost, and scholastic, and but I think one has to go to the spirit of the living Dharma to understand, there's this sort of to understand that actually, as monastics, as Buddhist teachers, we have a lot of influence. And you and I have talked. We talked about how when the monks, even in Thailand, in Wat Nanachat, became vegetarian, that at first the local Thai villagers didn't understand it. They thought they were just being renunciant. They were trying to be good Buddhist practitioners, because they didn't really connect the precept of non-harming to, and it's, the village culture, poor village culture. To have any meat was probably like in, many poorer cultures, is a sign of, wealth and so there wasn't really a reflection around it, but gradually they understood that the monks meant business, and then they started to just bring vegetarian food. And it was the same when we started in the monasteries, we're founding them in England. We had a lot of Asian support, and they wanted to bring the best to the monastics. And for them, that was meat, And then they started to see that the meat, we would receive what was offered, but you don't have to eat what is offered, actually. And there's no compulsion, there's no Vinaya rule that you have to eat what's in your bowl. So they would see that the meat was in the cat's bowls, which was hard, to put their precious offering to, we didn't mean them to see that, but then they started to understand. And then, mostly they started to bring vegetarian food. And I know some of the monks, like one of the Ajahn Sujito, is, I don't eat anything or, connect with anything that has a face on it. It's, there's things that you can make. There's a lot that Buddhist teachers, monastics can do, and particularly if you're not approaching it from the precept level of harmlessness and just the compassion level of the enormity of the suffering, the horrors of it, then even if you're approaching it from one of the leading causes, if not the leading cause of climate breakdown and the decimation of the biosphere, the warming of the biosphere and the collapse of the ecosystem, if you're not, you can relate it to that. I mean, how more urgent, how more of an action of harmlessness can there be than trying to encourage Buddhist practitioners to live on every level in a way that lessens this enormous threat that we're now facing, this as a civilization, which is the degradation and collapse of our environments, our eco environments.
So I was struck by what you said, and we've talked about this, as you mentioned, that it's, I mean, I hear it said all the time, well, we have to accept whatever's offered. But of course, there's lots of limitations on that. And the folks that are offering dana, either on alms rounds or coming to monasteries or temples, they certainly pick up on, you mentioned good, best food. I guess that's the test. They pick up on what is said, what monastics may say, body language, etc. They know what is, in your example in Thailand. They know what monastics consider to be the best food. So it's possible to let your intentions known in a very soft way, of course, because people are offering this. Sometimes people that don't have much to eat are offering food, but there is certainly a big opportunity, if I'm understanding, for monastics to make it known that they want a compassionate diet, that's their path. Yeah.
Of course there is. There's no question of that. And I think it's when you look at the Buddha's life, I mean, he actually he engaged in trying to stop wars. He negotiated water, conflicts around water use. I mean, he actually criticized animal sacrifice. It seems that there was a reluctance, but he did ordain women, and and in his ordination system, he directly challenged the caste, the hierarchy of caste. He ordained slaves. And people tried to kill him because he upset the system so much. So he wasn't just making subtle hints. He was actually pretty outspoken. And it's a very different world now. So it's, if you get to, I understand, and I can understand the wisdom in the Buddha not going along the route of Devadatta of, we just should all be vegetarian. He didn't make dietary requirements as the highest principle. He made the offering of dana and the receiving of dana, in terms of dana being food, as the primary principle, which allowed Buddhism to spread. Unlike Jainism, it spread throughout, as it has, because the diet, was to fishing villages, to the high plains of Tibet, where it's hard to grow vegetables and so on. But the way, even the way animals were harvested and killed for their meat in that era is vastly different from what we're doing now. And the consequences now are vastly more impactful than what was happening then. So if you can't really bring the spirit of the Dharma and the compassionate element to inform how to hold the Vinaya and these old guidelines, which of course we respect, then I think then one's culpable, actually, directly, in the perpetuating a culture of harm, which to me seems to go against the Buddhist precept. And it's understandable. I understand all the reasons, but I think once we wake up, we can make efforts to be more radical in this time and to give more of a meaning, going back to the root of what's really important now.
So I hear, and I'm sure you hear quite often, and since we've had DVA officially, it's our 10th year now, we hear all the time that, well, I'm not killing the animal. For those that are actually not slaughtering the animal, I'm not killing the animal. So my karma's still wholesome, no problem, not violating the precept. And it's kind of difficult for me even to put this out there because you know where I am on this. But you know, this is said all over Buddhist communities, not only in the U.S., but I hear it in Asia all the time. So what would you say to that?
Well, I think, first of all, it hurts the heart that to have such a disconnect actually around not understanding that what we conduct, our actions speak words, so if we don't actually, as a Buddhist teacher or monastic, don't convey just if you did it on the climate level, the enormous threat that we're all under, and then, and actually I do think we're implicated karmically, because when you awaken, it means my whole journey from when I was 14, when I was I didn't know what meat was, actually. I didn't know. But when I knew, I corrected my action. And I know that some deep habits, some deep cultural places, some fears that we have to upset the apple cart, it takes time to negotiate until the moment you can say, I'm not doing this anymore, regardless of the consequences of how people see me, that I'm an inconvenience, that I might get some negative pushback. And I think even more if you're holding the robe or the representation of holding that Dharma seat. I know people talk about medical issues and so on. Well, that's all very well, but that's your personal, but you're holding a Dharma seat for the collective. So I think there is a karmic implication actually in what we participate in. And if it's not for us directly, it's for the collective. And it's certainly for the animals. And they are living beings. They are voiceless, but they are like us in every way, actually. They have family relationships, they have emotions, they fear death. You see many of them on the slaughter line crying, trying to resist. They have their own cycles, they have their own right to be here. From Mother Nature, we don't have a right to take their lives. Actually. So these are all things that one has to honestly look at and not blithely just kind of hide behind a convenience of the Vinaya, or how the Vinaya is interpreted. And to look honestly, like I had to look honestly, that I actually just really like milk in my English cup of tea, but look what I'm associated with that, and it was a struggle. And then it was like, well, the whole thing now has to go. And at a certain point, I think in the awakening process, you feel this lifestyle change now has to happen. And it's a struggle to that point, maybe, but then when it happens, you're freer and you feel karmically freer. You feel energetically freer. I mean, Master Shinwa said, if you want to know why there's so many wars, go to the slaughterhouse and listen to the cries of animals. And he talked about the enormous shadow, the violence and the negative shadow, the karmic shadow that's over the planet from all of that violence. Billions of animals killed every day in violence. That's karma. So if we can not participate in that, and if we can help others to not participate in that, it's a wonderful, I think, honoring of the Buddhist path.
Mm. Yeah, thank you for that. And my own journey was I was vegetarian, as you were, for quite a while before my eyes were open to the harm we cause by eating animal products. What really helped me, and you mentioned this before, was to see the films. that, and this is not easy because of the slaughterhouses and the factory farms, of course, are not welcoming people in to take photos and photo ops. There's barbed wire fences and attack dogs and electrified fences, and they don't want people to see. But people, the really courageous people, have smuggled in video cameras and still cameras to show us what's happening. And that had a huge effect on my decision and all. So it's really, as I'm hearing what you're saying, it's really like getting in touch with the suffering, seeing what the cup of coffee with the milk, seeing what the hamburger, the chicken, what's behind that, how the animal gets to our plate. It's really the practice of the Dharma, as I understand it. It's the practice, understanding and being open to suffering. This is the first step in it for me. And we have these films. So on our website, people can see the film Meet Your Meat. So it's MEET, your MEAT, Meet Your Meat, narrated by Alec Baldwin. And then Paul McCartney narrates something called If Slaughterhouses Had Glass Walls, We'd All Be Vegetarian. And these are just smuggled in, secretly taking film of what actually happened, so we can see this, so we're not disassociating. So it's there. It's not easy to see these films too, but
it's really, but if it's not easy, that in itself says a lot, isn't it? But I agree with you. I just the heroes that go into these situations to bring out, to help us see the the enormous control of the reality that we're involved in around this industry. The shutting down, the prosecutions, they're trying to ag-gag laws, all of this. It's the pushback. But on the positive side, I think there's a massive movement happening now of veganism and plant-based food that's just taking the world by storm. And a lot of it's sports athletes and young people and popular musicians and influencers in the society that are coming out over and again for veganism. And I think that film that isn't I think it was it Be the Change, or the one about the athletes and all of the data that they're into.
It was Charles. Help us out here. Word change. I'm just totally blanking out. It's really good. I'll think of it in a minute.
Game Changers. Thank you.
It. Yeah.
Game Changers.
Yeah.
That was very impactful. Thanissara was, in the old world when we could still travel, he was in an Uber, and the guy was driving. He just said, "I just saw that movie a couple of days ago, and I'm becoming a vegan," and so I think there's just a revolution happening actually around this.
It's really positive. It's encouraging to see that. We're getting some questions up in our chat room, so let me read one. It's more of a comment than a question. It's from Ashwani. If you watch Dr. Greger's video on pandemics from some years ago, he traces all of history's pandemics from 9,000 years ago to today and traces each and every one to animal agriculture. This is karma in action. I don't think you disagree with that. Huh?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. There's right from the Sutta Nipata, which is probably the most authentic original text in Theravada, the Buddha talks about the first few diseases were aging, the disease of aging, the disease of desire, and I think the disease of impermanence, something like that. He talks of a golden age. And then he goes on to talk about when the killing of animals started, then all the other diseases started. So that's in the Buddhist original text as well, attributed to the words of the Buddha. And it's the Sutta Nipata, it's one of our favorite texts. But also in terms of, I agree, and I think this also goes into the other issues of our encroachment on wildlife, what we call wildlife, and their territories and their habitats. And, the jumping of species of these viruses that seem to all be related to our encroachment on wild animals, actually. And we can expect more of that. And look at the devastation that we're under with coronavirus. With the transmigration of species there, of this virus from one. I mean, after all, we have animal bodies too. So, to think that somehow we're going to be protected from that. And I think that also relates to this larger question of how we actually view animals, and from this old theosophic place of domination, the right to dominate, the right to control, the right to invade, the right to use. So in this era and at this time, I think that's really up for question. I think a lot of people are really recalibrating around how they understand their relationship to the whole animal kingdom and all creatures and nature herself. That's our primary curriculum for now, actually, to recalibrate around that.
Yeah.
And to respecting the rights. Yesterday I was watching, they just released a documentary called Invisible Hand about the first naming of rights for Mother Nature, for rivers, for mountains, for lakes, and the struggle for that. But I think this is where we're going, to understand that we don't own, we haven't got the right to take the lives, to dominate, to invade, so.
So I'm just shift a little bit. Thank you for that. Thanks for putting that all together. I really appreciate that. So you've been a core teacher at Insight Meditation Society and Teachers Council at Spirit Rock Meditation Center. Yes. So for we got some people that are watching from Asia. It's 10:15 at night in Sri Lanka. It's 11:45 at night in both Thailand and Vietnam, and it's in the middle of the morning in Australia. So some people are actually up listening to you right now. So these are two of the big Vipassana Theravada centers, Buddhist centers in the United States: Insight Meditation Society and Spirit Rock Meditation Center. And that's both of those places I've gone to for a number of years. So you're, a central teacher at both places. So I hear from everyone. I've been involved as a student and doing some teaching also. And this is something, talking about eating animal products, and our conversation today is something that's not talked about much at the centers. Am I right about that? Why do you think that's true?
It's never talked about. It's like a taboo, It's, a couple of years ago, one of the yogis came back from Spirit Rock Center and wrote an email about why aren't we vegan? And it was quite challenging, but it was very well written, and I did send it to the teacher body and endorsed it, And to give credit, I do notice that the cooks themselves were doing primarily more and more vegan food and putting out vegan cheeses. So I think there was the impetus to do that. But there was it really was like, this isn't a subject we're going to debate. There was quite a lot of quite fierce pushback. And, using the arguments of the Vinaya and all of that. Personal health, but there was a lot of emotional, it's an emotional subject. And I think what surprised me, coming from Europe, in the Dharma scene in Europe, most of the Dharma teachers I know are vegetarian. I mean, it's not all of them, but there are those that aren't in the minority. And it was the opposite here. And that surprised me. But, I think it has to come, the lay people the monks and nuns, or Dharma teachers representing the lineage, are not the only ones that shape the whole story. In the time of the Buddha, most of the Vinaya rules actually came from pressure from lay people, that said, we don't like that the monks are, turning up any old time to get alms food. So the Buddha said, you can only go once before 12, and on it went, so there weren't really any rules at first. And then everything that happened, a rule became, a rule became, a rule became. So you see the organic nature of that. It wasn't like, these are sacred rules that lead you to Nibbana, and that's often how it's held. These are sacred. It was a very practical, pragmatic response to this time and circumstance that the Buddha was in. And we're in a, so I think practitioners and people that go to these centers, like my friend, Charity Khan, who wrote this brilliant letter, I think that can be done too. One can put pressure. And I think the more pressure that happens, then it tips the scales. It creates these tipping points, and then it becomes a norm. So then you can still cater, ways. The norm then is the vegan, and then there's ways you cater for people that have health issues or whatever, or a special fridge, rather than the other way around. So I think that can really happen. And then people have to look at the fact that often they just like to eat meat, and say that's fine, just own it, rather than couch it in these Buddhist things, just like, I like my hamburger, it's fine, keep working at it.
Attached to the taste of the animal flesh. Right? That's...
now there's like amazing, like Beyond Meat and Impossible Burgers, and there's so many. And I saw one in China that's just come out about pork, vegan pork. And, quite honestly, if you cooked one of their burgers and gave it to a meat, they probably couldn't tell. They can't tell the difference. They've done it. And it's actually healthier, and it's got more, just the same proteins. So one can be, there's almost very hard to find an excuse nowadays, but there are those that have health issues. I don't think one should be, completely extreme, actually, because it is a difficult issue. But on the other hand, I think one should just be clear. This is a very fundamental issue for Buddhists to consider, and we can do things. We can all do something.
Yeah, we can. And just bringing this up, and like you have been doing at centers, or DVA is trying to do it, and I know you have been doing it. We're going to work together, is so important, just to get it on the table, because the animals can't come in to the board meeting or the teacher meeting and say, why are you guys eating me and my children? Obviously can't do that. So we have to do it for them. This is a main purpose of DVA, and I really appreciate all that you've done. I look forward to working together on this. I'd like you to read a question and comment from Vicky Seguin, our chapter leader in Chicago. So Vicky says, thank you so much for being here. In A Time to Stand, you write beautifully about contemplation and meditation as a vital ally in getting beyond our fears. As a longtime vegan and Buddhist practitioner, I still find myself at times feeling despair and pulling away from the pain. Could you say more about how you use your practice, or would you advise us in using our practice in those or similar times?
Well, we just keep using the practice. I think what the important thing is, look, we're in a multiple crisis world. We've got COVID. We've just had the fires in California. We were in evacuation emergency alert mode last week or so. We've got fascism at the door, actually in the White House. It's an appropriate response to feel emotionally overwhelmed, despairing. I think it's important that we also reach out and connect with others, and to keep having faith to the practice, because the practice is the thing that's going to really help, even keep afloat, but even to allow us to work with these difficult feelings and to accept them, it's okay to feel what we feel. There's nothing wrong. There's nothing. It's a reflection of the enormity of what we're going through. And then we've had this large issue of the climate crisis and collapse of biodiversity. We're going to feel every feeling you can possibly feel about that. So, but the thing is not to honor them, to feel what we feel, and we keep going, and then we distill those feelings into response. That's the path. We tend to ourselves, work with what we're feeling, using the practice, and then it helps to clarify. We have to make responses. What are the optimum responses?
Thanissara, could you also, maybe the answer is the same, but maybe slightly different or different. This is from Ali, our chapter leader in Metro DC. Thank you so much. How to skillfully deal with anger and grief towards others, to other well-meaning humans who know, in quotes, what happens to animals, but won't change their habits, especially friends and family.
Well, you have to have a bit of a long-term view on some of that. I mean, when I go home to my family now, my mum just gets an all vegetarian, vegan food, and I do the cooking for her, and she loves it. I think one of the things that Charity and I were wanting to do is through our platform and in alliance with DVA, is to do a sort of a non-judgmental space invitation, a 5-6 week course, a fun course for becoming vegan, and doing classes and cook demos and why and support groups and so on. So we're working on launching that in the new year. So I think there's ways that one can, cook for people. One can, I think it's quite hard for people when they get very defensive when we come over as as critical, and I understand why, because the urgency and the enormity of what we're up against and what's happening for the animals. But I think there's ways, particularly when it's an intractable situation and it's family and friends, where one can, it's hard now because we're all in lockdown and shut down. So, but, if and when that changes, which I'm assuming it will at some point, one can host vegan parties, one can put on a class, there's lots of things we can do that invite people into the space. And then gradually, once people, it's like the mindfulness movement, it invites people into their own awareness. And once that door opens, then something deeper starts to happen. Mm. So that tends to be my approach. Maybe I should be more like, and I might do that. I wouldn't say that I would become more like vocal. And, I think this is one of the things I feel very positive about is, having some hardcore messages like watch this documentary, Cowspiracy, Meet the Meat, or whatever, as part of the curriculum of the course. And we'll have fun too, so...
It sounds like a good combination to me. Have some fun and let's look seriously at this. And I think in a way, a lot of times, of course, we're preaching to the choir. So people that come to our classes and our speakers program, et cetera, are those that are either vegetarian or vegan or, or aspiring to. But we need some way to kind of break the ice. And maybe at these centers we can find, each one would be different. We can find some way. Maybe it's just a special meal that we donate, that DVA donates, and introducing your great idea about the class and bringing that to the centers and having some way to involve people there, because we can affect the dais, I think, of more people if there was better leadership at least at the Western centers.
Yeah, I think that there's a sort of I think it's probably better to appeal to younger people. There's a thing that's so set in leadership and the ways and the views. And some people have mentioned, I'm just briefly skimming the comments of the pushback they received in the kitchens. It's like at Spirit Rock trying to change the culture. I think the thing is to break the taboo. to break the taboo of why don't we speak about this? We're doing massive work on racial diversity, but we're not doing it on climate, and we're not doing it on animal. The vegan thing. It's like some are doing more on climate, but they're not connecting the dot to. So what is this taboo? What is this thing that's how can we keep breaking that open so that the norm becomes, you change the norm rather than the exception becomes, the vegan's the exception, creating the norm. And so that the person has to more vigorously justify why they're holding their ground rather than the other way around,
Yeah, I really like what you just said. And I can liken that to the tables at Spirit Rack, where the food, it used to be, so the food there is all vegetarian, but lots of dairy and eggs. But as you said, it has changed remarkably towards a healthier, more supportive of the planet and kinder to animals, with lots of vegan food now. Sometimes that's all that's on the main table. But they'd have something in the back that would, like, you have to go into the back because one could not, if one was vegan, as I haven't since 2004, you'd have to go to the back table to find the vegan food. So why not put that in the table? And then if somebody wants, animal to the back, or in centers that are serving animal flesh now, and there's countless centers in the West that are doing that, of course, is to put the vegetarian and vegan food on the main table, just changing it a little bit. So making that the norm, if we can somehow get that. Just a little change in the geography of the food might make a difference as well.
Well, I would be up for co-authoring some kind of, I think at the moment it's harder because the centers aren't open, but as we're in this time, I see the COVID time as a time of recalibrating everything. It's given us permission to really look at everything and where we're coming from. And it's giving us as centers permission to look at what are we doing and what are we teaching and what's the world we're in now. We're in a crisis management world now because of the ways we've lived and the choices we've made, one of them being this whole subject that we're on. So I would be very up for co-authoring, in a sort of invitational way, but a strong message about this might be a time to reconsider this issue and how it's handled in these, different centers. To normalize the, to make the norm. Like someone was saying, Plum Village, it's not even up for discussion, And I think that's the advantage, to tell you the truth, the advantage from the Chinese lineage of the Mahayana, that they're very clear that, but I think this sort of loophole around around the dietary requirement, which I understand from the time of the Buddha, but man, we're in a different world, and the world is dying. We're killing it. It's not dying, we're killing it. And the actions we're taking are directly connected with the killing of the planet. And that is connected with our treatment of animals, front and center. So I think, one could actually, in this time of recalibration, ask for more radical response. It's not actually radical, it's compassionate. And I love someone who was also saying that, in the Western, that perhaps people don't know how the full wonderful range of vegan cooking you can do, from Asia. And this is something we'd like to bring into our classes, to have demos of, all of the different ways that you can cook. You don't have to just replicate, I'll just get some vegan sausages and a baked potato, which I often do actually in a hurry. But there's a whole range of really lovely. You can make cooking as part of, which I also do. When I love to actually explore new recipes, vegan recipes, and take time to cook them and then enjoy them. Including vegan cheeses, which are quite easy to make and are very delicious. There's just so many. Even our friend in South Africa has now started a vegan pie company. He's been experimenting Start your own company. If you don't know what to do, start cooking vegan meals on wheels, just do something. There's lots of things. If you've got time and you're feeling a bit depressed on what to do, ask for a few investors, and maybe that's something DVA can fundraise for, investment in projects that people want to start up.
Yeah.
There's just so much that we can actually proactively do, and not just feel like, oh, I'm just waiting for these guys to change that aren't going to change. Well, leave them be and just pitch to where you can find the change.
Great. I mean, I love your idea. So the film was Game Changer that we're trying to think of, and to actually try to do that with Buddhist centers and start right here in the U.S. And then
I think the U.S. is still, even though it's in tatters at the moment, and hopefully it can be reclaimed, but people still are looked to, and I think in the Dharma scene, there's still a huge influence from the U.S. I see someone's put here. This
is there any other question there from Charles Thanissara that you can see up on? We should conclude in a minute or two.
Yes.
Anybody on the webinar that wants to ask a question, Charles? Or we can unmute or something.
In San Francisco, they've got a free food program called Curry Without Worry. Maybe if there's a link to that, it'd be lovely to have that. I know Billie Eilish, who's one of the great, young pop singers, beautiful singer. She's vegan and promoting it, and her mother started buy a vegan meal for, I think it was the nurses and people on the front lines in COVID. She started a project. You can send so many dollars and they'll buy a meal for you. Mm-hmm. Thank you for that link.
Yeah, thanks for the link. That was quick.
You should have resources to gather all these tips and links.
Yeah, we should. If we could harvest that, it'd be great, Charles. So just the way I just wanted to ask and use this time, if you just to say whatever you want, of course, but there's an estimate of the number of Buddhists in the world. Like, who knows? It depends how many are in China, but it could be pretty close to 1 billion. It's certainly at least 500 million. Are you hopeful that someday we will see, maybe not us, but our descendants, etc., next generations might see Buddhists actually stop eating animals?
Well, I think we could definitely hold that vision, and to know that in Chinese Mahayana monastics and probably in other Vietnam, Korea, I don't know so much, that they already are vegan actually, and that that's a great influence. So we've already got a precedent set. There's a difficult piece here, like, because you're talking also about, people see this still see it as a very entitled Western white thing. It's not true, because the cooks we had that were vegans were both African at our center, but I think that the demographic view has to change, and the understanding of how food is connected with social justice issues. And that there has to be if you come from a sort of more privileged place, and you're sort of coming to a community that say, they're fishing village in Sri Lanka or something, and you're saying you can't eat fish. Well, what are you going to replace that with? How do you understand that? How do you there's someone saying the myth of veganism is a Western creation myth that comes from Western. Well, it doesn't just come from Western. I've actually been pushed back from some of my fellow African practitioners, African American practitioners, POC practitioners, that that's how it's also perceived. But I think this is a dialogue place of privilege, that I have the privilege to choose. Not everyone does, perhaps, in the cultures and the systems they're in. So when you're talking about Buddhists as a whole, there's so many different types of Buddhists, so many different types of demographics in that you got to be very mindful that coming over as, you know, from an American or British culture to dictate terms is probably, we're not the ones to be the front people line on that, you know. So people from within the cultures themselves that have become vegan and how they've done that would be the primary people to take that message. Yeah, there's a huge upsurge and people tracing it back to their roots of Black vegan chefs and cooks, and that's another thing one can actually support. One can financially support, is actually find out who is doing what. There's loads of very cool initiatives happening from within the Black culture, within the POC culture, and traditional cultures that have always been vegan. How can we highlight them, promote them, support them, so that we, as you know, we get behind that rather than leading the charge, so to speak. So those sorts of places, there's something to explore.
Yeah, no, I mean, these are great ideas. We try to do that, at least in the couple Asian countries we're in, is with fishing villages in Sri Lanka. I mean, you have to find people there that can say that are attuned with our message, that can say, here, we can move into this. There has to be something to replace, food to replace, livelihood to replace, for sure, before people are going to make a change. And in Vietnam, where we have another countrywide project, we have 50,000 monastics that, as you say, are, if they're not 100% vegan, they're 99.9%, because the same word in Vietnamese, vegetarian, means vegan as well. We work with them. We try to keep a low profile there. And it's a challenge in the West, as you say, to do this. We have to find ways to.
I think you know, what we can do is approach the Western white dominated centers. You know, that's something we definitely can do, and think of strategies. Someone asked how to do that. I think that's a good question, to think of strategies how to do that. And I think someone's also saying, Claire, about the food deserts in the US, that it is a social justice issue. You know, it's people can't go to Whole Foods and buy you know, it's expensive, a little expensive still, you know, that it's easier to get to a Walmart, for example. But even Walmart, you can even put pressure on these large stores to start to change what they're offering. I mean, there's so many fronts that can be worked on. I think it's not like, will Buddhists become, it partly depends on what consciousness and what actions we bring now to what will be. You know, that's the message of karma that the Buddha gave. It's not just some fatalistic, it's like what we do and how and what consciousness we bring to what we do that changes the current karma. So, you know, we have this optimum moment to bring this, and it so dovetails into the larger issue of our multiple crises, that the pandemics, the global, the biosphere and environmental collapse that we're in the midst, biodiversity collapse that we're in the midst of, and even the fascism, you know, the dominating mindset of the systems that we've been wedded into, this sort of the patriarchy, the misogyny of this sort of the lack of, you know, it's a feminist issue as well, the control of animals' reproductive processes. In this industry is horrific, you know, so all of these are lined up right now. And so this central issue is a central issue, you know, and so it's just to keep at it. I think there are tipping points that are happening, and there's probably still great and creative ways and pressure points that we can continue to press, you know, and speak to. And, you know, someone said that, you know, Indian food is pretty much all vegan, and it's wonderful, you know. So exposing people more to the use of the wonderful foods that are already available.
Yeah. Well, I think. Do you have any other questions that you want to respond to? Otherwise, I will. Yeah.
Someone's saying that at Walmart you can find meat substitutes, and that's how far it's been changing in the culture. It's amazing.
Yeah, it is amazing.
I think the other thing is, I thank you, Ashwa, for mentioning that. I think the other issue that we need to look at is those having to work in the meat plants, primarily poor people, immigrant peoples, people from, it's a very violent, not only are the meat workers, meat packers working, she's quoting 170 people died already from COVID and probably more. And the whole industry is so deeply wedded to such abuse and violence. So that's the other thing to bring out, is not just the animals, of course, but those, they get post-traumatic stress, they bring it back to their homes. It's dangerous work, it's violent work, and there's often very little options, so it is a minority immigrant issue for sure.
This is really important. I'm glad you remembered to said that, because I didn't remember to ask you about slaughterhouse workers and workers in factory farms. The slaughterhouses are the most dangerous place in the U.S., lowest paid job. People of color have the ones that take jobs there have very little of any other choices. Many are women immigrants from Latin America, and it's incredibly violent and dangerous. So there's a lot of intersecting issues here which are really important. And it gives us ways that we can talk to Buddhist communities and engage, which is really what we need to do now. I can't thank you enough for joining us, Thanissara. Hope to have you on again some point in time. We'll get you back on to talk, and really appreciate you've been such an eloquent voice for animals. I just deeply appreciate you. And thanks to everyone for coming on the call. I want to say one thing, so we have a lot of ideas of what we can do in DVA, but some of these ideas, many of them really require support from our members and from those of you that are not members. So you can go to our website and go to the Donate Now tab. It's real simple. Right now we have a match, unlimited match for a period of time. It doesn't matter how much you donate, it'll be matched 1-for-1, and also become a member. If you go to Take Action on our website, Dharma Voices for Animals.org, it's right there. Take action, become a member, you get our newsletter. That's how you find out about someone like Thanissara coming on here to share her wonderful insights into this issue that concerns all of us. So thank you Thanissara, thank you so much.
Thank you for
this
all
is great.
Amazing work, Bob, and everyone involved. And thank you for everyone with your wonderful comments and links. Namaste. Thank you. And thank you, Charles, for being there, putting it all together in the background on the tech side. It's been such a pleasure, and I look forward to working more with DVA and seeing what wonderful good trouble, as Representative Congressman John Lewis would say, what more good trouble we can get into around this issue.
It's wonderful. Thank you so much. Take care, everyone.
Take care.